Well, thanks for having us, guys. This has been a great weekend. We're just blessed to be able to be with you and to share from our own experience and from the blessing of the Lord on our homeschooling journey over the last 25 years. What we'd like to do in closing and given this last talk is put feet on some of the things that we've been sharing with you with respect to teaching literature, but more importantly, with respect to being homeschool parents. And what I want to do is give Missy as much time as she needs to sort of tell elements of her story as a homeschool mom. And of course, that became our story as homeschool parents together. But a lot of that happened in the crucible of Missy's homeschool, the basement of our house, and also in her mind and heart. And so I think it would be really helpful and beneficial for you other homeschool parents to hear how it went down with her. But what I want to do is jump in every once in a while, grab the mic and interrupt, because that's my job, and it's what I'm good at. If you've ever heard us on a podcast, by the way, BiblioFiles with an F, the CenterForLit podcast, where Missy holds forth, and I interrupt her every now and then. That's kind of what I'm good at. But before I give her the mic, I want to give a little bit of context for our story and refer to the talk I just gave on the book of Job. Raise your hand if you were in my talk on Job and the lessons of Job. Okay, so some of you are. I don't want to repeat a lot of that, but just kind of give a little context. One of the things about the story of Job, if you look at it as a work of literature, is that it's the story of a protagonist striving for a goal against what seems like an insuperable obstacle. And in this way, Job has something profound in common with almost every other story that's ever been written or composed. But the thing about the story of Job is that the obstacle, the insuperable obstacle, is the will, and it turns out the love and mercy of God. That's an insuperable obstacle if there ever was one. And one of the things we learn from Job is that his real problem, the protagonist, always has a problem. He wants something and can't have it. His problem is an existential one. It's a theological one. It has to do with something wrong in his soul, something wrong in his mind. His assumptions about how the world actually works and how God actually relates to man turn out to be mistaken. And it's not a simple, easy mistake either. It's not a mild mistake. It's a drastic, devastating, crucial existential mistake, the penalty for which is damnation. And it turns out that in the story of Job, God comes in not to thwart and obliterate Job and judge Job, but to save his soul from the pit, as his friend Elihu remarks in chapter 33. God comes in to confound Job's plan for creating his own future and saving himself by his own efforts, so as to save his soul from damnable idolatry. And one of the reasons that I love telling the story of Job is because it resonates so profoundly in my life and in Missy's life as homeschool parents. We've traveled a lot of the road of Job in some ways. And we were talking about, and Missy, you don't know this, but we were talking about in the session that, and I can't remember who it was that said it, man, if you don't have a case against God, so this is what he put. He said, if Job doesn't have a case against God, then you probably don't. And it led us to talk about how an epic hero in literature, his situation is way more dramatic than average. He's a way bigger deal, a larger than life character, way more than the average person. And so his situation is a magnified version of something that might be happening in everybody's heart and in everybody's life. And it turns out that the situation of Job, although his is way more dramatic, was going on with Missy and me when we started raising our kids and deciding to homeschool them. So anyway, that's kind of an overview of how it went with us, and I want to talk a little bit more about how it turned out in the terms of the story of Job. But before I do that, I want to let Missy introduce it and start sort of paint a picture of the early days of our homeschooling career, because man, oh man, it sure looked like it was going to go well.
I wonder if you'd pray for us before.
Oh, that's a great idea. Always with a good idea, my wife. Let's pray for just a moment. Lord, I do come before you and ask you to Be present here among us as we talk about these issues by your Holy Spirit. I pray that your spirit of enlightenment and knowledge and peace and grace would flow among us, and that the words that we say, if they come from you and are consonant with your word and your gospel, would go down into the hearts of these brothers and sisters. Lord, I also pray that anything that we cook up of our own strength would be instantly forgotten. Amen. Glorify your name here, Lord, among us, and encourage us by your Spirit. In Jesus' name, amen. 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 So as I was saying, it started off so well.
Well, it did, actually. Some of you have probably been in I've given a couple of talks this weekend, and I shared a little bit about my background. Growing up in a family that really valued education. My mother was the first in her family that received a college education, and she went on to be an English literature teacher for 30-odd years. So I grew up surrounded by learning and education and really valuing that myself. I was also a product of the public school. So the performance orientation, where you're always going after that gold star and you really don't want a black mark after your name, the carrot and the stick, was really right before my eyes always. And I was an achiever, an overachiever, a high performer, and learned to really love succeeding this way. I was an inveterate performer. Performance and the gold star was like dopamine to me. Okay, I don't know if that resonates with any of you, but I really wanted to do well. And so I came into my marriage with Adam with a lot of ideas of what that would look like. It adopted the homeschooling vision very young in our marriage, when Ian was about 2 years old. And I was going to be the best homeschool mom there ever was. I didn't care what it took. I was going to do it. And I had all kinds of noble ideas about what that was going to accomplish, and conflated them all with my identity. Okay, not to put too fine a point on it. If homeschooling was a noble enterprise, and certainly homeschooling is a noble enterprise, if I was involved in it, then I was noble. Except I was kind of the fly in that ointment right from the get-go, because we know that we're all fallen and flawed. And though I assented to that mentally, I had accepted the Lord as a child and was following hard after him, and was very, very earnest and zealous in what I was doing in my home. The performance mentality so governed my understanding of everything that the conflation was complete before I even knew it. I had not yet received eyes from the Lord to watch myself think and see that the way that I perceived the homeschooling project had everything to do with whether or not I was going to be a success, my children were going to be a success, and with my name, right? I am a success. I am a successful person. My child is a success. They are a successful person. The names that I longed for, the well done, good and faithful servant, was entirely wrapped up with how well my child did, because that reflected on how well I did. And I hope you can see, without me going into a lot more detail here, how that muddied the waters of the homeschooling project. You want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure, yeah. I don't know that that's super necessary. I mean, I think it's pretty clear that what you did was you said, okay, my goal is to be the very most profitable servant of the Lord that I can possibly be in this particular context. As we said in the last hour, I know the levers that need pulling. What you got to do is you got to design a good curriculum. You got to commit yourself. You got to decide not to go get a job outside the home, but to sacrifice all of that and stay home and be a full-time homeschooler. You got to start in September and go all the way through May. You got to make sure that the lessons are done and the lessons are designed and that all the kids are assiduously educated. And the eventual legitimate reward and payment for that work will be, among other things, a well done from God. Is that fair enough?
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, that's absolutely fair.
Well,
it went well for a while. You start with just one ball in the air, one plate spinning, right? And then you add two. Still going pretty well. Then comes 3. Ooh, it's getting harder.
Into
Then
the mic,
4.
my love.
You know, you're kind of doing this with your foot, keeping the balls going, and then you're hopping around, and you're going 6 ways to Sunday pretty soon. By the time that my oldest hit high school, all 6 of my kids were schooling. And that year in our homeschool co-op, where I was teaching literature to 6th grade levels, I taught 36 titles just in literature. And that didn't count foreign languages and worldview philosophy, Bible, and history and science, and forget math. Math fell off the table a couple of times. I had 2 kids twice over. This didn't just happen once, guys, twice, that skipped math for a year. And I didn't notice. I mean, once, that's bad enough, but twice? And let me just say this now. One of them now is in finance. How's that? Isn't that ironic? And he's doing great. So no harm, no foul. But anyway, I just say that to let you know that the Lord has funny ways of breaking us for our own good. And one of the ways he did that for me was pile it on, right? Okay, you're doing this. Okay, let's do this then. Because this is the law. You know, the law of God finds its expression in all kinds of little L places, okay? And these are the little laws of homeschooling, places that the effect of the law came to roost in my own life as I pursued those things for the well done, as I pursued those things for belonging, for identity, for relationship with God, and however earnest I was, and however good those things were, they were all good things, they couldn't serve me in the way that I thought they could. Because that well done, well, first of all, it was mine before I started. And knowing that the well done is yours before you start changes the project entirely. But when you don't know that, when you're striving all the time for that well done, striving, hoping, conflating your identity with your performance, conflating your child's identity with his performance. His identity has bearing on your identity. If he fails, you fail, right? If he gets an A, you get an A. Suddenly your child is responsible for your success. How heavy is that? I mean, isn't it enough that he feels responsible for his own success? Now he's responsible for his mother's success too. You see, that's really unfair. And none of this, of course, was self-conscious. I was doing a good thing, and I was earnest about it. It was important. I had vision, and ideas have consequences, right? I knew this. I laid my life down very self-consciously in order to give my kids something more, something better. So I don't want to paint a picture of someone who is running blindly in a direction that she knew she ought not to go. All that I was doing because I felt called by God, and I was trying to do the best job I could. But this presupposition that undergirded everything that I was doing overlooked essential truths of the Christian faith that really would root an individual down and secure us so that when those things got difficult, there was grace, right? Grace. Grace not only for me in the moment, in the midst of all those plates that were spinning, but also grace for my child. Homeschooling with grace is an entirely different thing than the kind of hamster wheel homeschooling that I was doing in those years. And as I said, for a while it went very well, but as the kids got older, in particular as our oldest, Ian, got older, he started to sniff something.
I gotta talk here. It gets specific here, and I want to give you some details because Missy experienced all this in her heart and in her guts, and it got theological pretty fast. And when she looks back on it, it's theological now because the real truth of things has to do with your relationship with God and with her relationship with God and with my relationship with God. But there were some circumstances too, and they have to do with high school and college and Hillsdale. So let me just paint a quick picture. Missy and I went to Hillsdale College, which I don't know if any of you are aware of it, but it's a fairly well-known liberal arts college in conservative political circles. Back in the 80s, it was still that. It was already that. And we went there and got a fabulous, what I still today consider to be a fabulous liberal arts education. And we're very, very proud of our Hillsdale College experience. And we fell in love with all of our professors, and we were just so glad to bleed Charger blue, if you know what I mean. And so Ian is growing up, and he's the first of 6 homeschoolers, and it starts to become time for him to enter high school. And at that point, of course, the level of difficulty of the homeschooler goes up exponentially because of this thing called a college or a high school transcript, right, and college entrance exams. And the specter began to appear on our horizon of sending Ian to Hillsdale, of having him apply to our alma mater, of having Ian, our pride and joy, the work of our hands, go to Hillsdale and say, I am Adam and Missy Andrews' son. And going in and sitting in the classes of some of our old professors who still taught there, who knew us, and succeeding in those classes, and wowing those professors, and causing those professors to say, wow, Adam and Missy Andrews really did a great job. That Ian Andrews is something else. This specter, and I'll call it a specter and double down on that terminology, rose in our minds as we started to prepare Ian for high school. And I'll let Missy describe what a burden this was or how large an issue this became. But from my own part, even though I wasn't involved in the daily crush of homeschooling, there came along with the knowledge that we were going to try and send Ian to Hillsdale a nagging anxiety. A nagging anxiety that there could be several points along this process where it wouldn't work out. Maybe he wouldn't get in. Maybe he wouldn't get the full ride scholarship that his father and mother had gotten. Maybe he wouldn't perform well. Maybe old Dr. Bauman, who had been our hero back in the day, wouldn't approve. And all of these things, and it seems ridiculous for me to say to you, but it's true and she'll back me up. These things were too terrible to contemplate because of the status of Hillsdale and the goal that we had set for ourselves as the be-all and end-all of homeschooling.
I think that's fair. I just want to connect with you because at this point, I can see if I were sitting in the audience, I think, wow. I mean, you guys were really proud. You were screwed up. I'm sure glad I'm not as screwed up as you. Right? I totally would be responding like that if I were in your shoes right now. And I just want to double down myself on this idea that all of this was subconscious. Nobody sets out to screw up their kids on purpose. We love our kids. We sacrifice for our kids. We want what's best for our kids. We had received something really good at Hillsdale College. And we wanted that for our kids. That's what was motivating us. And if you add to that the fact that homeschooling in general is a really solitary, lonely pursuit, even when you're hooked up with a co-op or a good church, you're doing it alone in your basement by and large. And nobody knows. Like, you don't know. You hope you're doing well. You think you're doing well. But, you know, the imposter syndrome. Does anybody know what the imposter syndrome is? Yeah. You know, it rears its ugly head in the homeschool environment with mom all the time. You think, is this really legit? Like, I know, I mean, this is what I did when I was in school. And I varied it here and there because I don't think public school is where it's at. But you know, does this count? Like, nobody's watching over my shoulder, giving me a grade, and I'm giving them grades, and I am swimming upstream in the culture 100% of the time. I told you my mother was from a public school. She was a public school high school teacher, and she's watching us do this, and she's like, I don't know if you think this will work. I don't know. I'm concerned about you. I'm concerned about the kids. And are you testing? How are their scores? And, you know, of course, as the kids grew and she saw the fruits of what was going on in the home, she became very, very supportive. She was my biggest cheerleader. One of my dearest possessions is a diploma that my mother made for me to essentially validate everything that I was doing in my homeschool with my children. And she and my stepfather and my mother-in-law and my father-in-law, they all signed it. And it still hangs on my wall in my homeschool area today. It's the most valuable diploma that I have because it was their good faith in what I was doing, their support of me. But, it's complicated. It's complicated. Isn't that how the human heart is? It's very complicated and multifaceted. And what is it that the proverbist says? The heart is deceitful and desperately wicked. Who can know it? Like, we don't even know it. We're going along. There's a way that seems right unto a man. The end thereof is death, right? Pursuing all these good things because I love my kids and I want them to have these good things. And those good things become a snare when they become ultimate things. And that's what was going on in my life. So Ian gets into high school and things get pretty difficult. And by degrees, this very happy, very verbal, very relational young man that was really close with me started to just yank against the chain. Just a little bit, just yank a little bit against the chain. And he's as verbal as I am. Adam says that he came out of the womb, grabbed me around the neck and said, "I'll be in charge around here," which is, that's fair. So we had a joyful adversarial relationship for a lot of time that he was growing up in the home, and both of us very verbal, and we would have repartee back and forth, and it was all in good humor. But as he got older, he began to pull away until finally, we're trying to equip him and prepare him for college, and it got to be time for SAT testing. And Adam, you want to take over here?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, SAT testing. I talked about that earlier this morning, right? And you remember how vehemently I said standardized testing is a complete waste of time, right? Don't worry about it, unless you want your kid to go to Hillsdale.
Or any other college.
And then you got to have them SAT tested. And for us, the thing was so freighted because we'd both scored really highly on our SATs, not that matters at all, and had gotten big, huge scholarships to Hillsdale, not that matters at all, but it mattered to us because if Ian didn't do the same thing, then what she was saying about the well done from God wouldn't come true. And again, subconsciously, but everything was riding on it. But the poor kid, everything was riding on his performance in this moment. He was 17 years old. And the future of his mother's psychological health rode on his every decision. And so he took the SAT and aced it. He did a great job on his SAT. His mother hit it out of the park. He didn't get a perfect score, but he got a score that was big enough to qualify him for a scholarship at Hillsdale. And by the way, we're book nerds, we're academics. This is the stuff of our dreams and aspirations and fantasies, right? It's SAT scores and grade point averages. I realize that that's super nerdy. And there's probably something else out there that's your thing. But our thing is grades and SAT scores. And he takes the SAT and he does a great job. I mean, a really great job. I mean, a pretty good job. I mean, didn't get 100. So we said to him, "I've heard that if you take the SAT test twice, your scores go up. Why don't you take it again?" And so he said, "Okay." And he took it again for us. And his scores went up. I told you. I said that would happen. Nice job, Ian. I mean, that was great. That was really great. That was pretty great. I mean, you didn't get 100 yet. Why don't you take it again? And he didn't say okay this time. But he did take it again, and his score went down for some reason. And I, in my wisdom, said, "Oh, well, I guess that's enough. That's probably good enough." I've gotten numb to saying this in public, but when I first started saying this in public, it was hard to get through that line. It was embarrassing to say I made my son take the SAT test 3 times so that I could make sure that Dr. Bauman at Hillsdale College was justly proud of me. About the time he was going to leave for college, we had him all set up. He'd gotten his scholarship. It was still a big, fat scholarship. Not as big as mine, but It's okay. He said, hey, Dad, I need to talk to you. I said, fine, what? And he took me out into the corner of our property, and he sat me down at this picnic table we had, and he said, I hate you. And I'm going off to college, and I don't really care if we talk. I'm out of here, and I'm glad to be going. And that is the first cross word my son had ever said to me in his life. We had a wonderful, loving, happy-go-lucky, positive, verbal relationship for his entire life. This was a shot out of the blue to me. I was completely floored. And I think I want to have you talk at this point about how it went down with you, but I just want to leave my part of the story sitting at that picnic table in the woods next to our house with this look on my face. What do you mean? And to reference my Job talk from a minute ago, I have pulled every single one of the relevant levers here. I'm the best dad who ever lived. I didn't say it out loud, but it was loud in here. And I started making a list of the things I had done correctly. I feared God and turned away from evil. I was blameless and upright. I can make it look like that too. It's true. And what I got for it was, I hate you. I'm out of here, and don't be surprised if I don't contact you from college.
So Adam came home and he told me this, and I was absolutely devastated and shocked and really, really angry. I come from a broken family. My father walked out when I was 12. So the difference between what I had experienced in my home and what Ian had had in terms of an on-the-scenes father who was hands-on, involved, loving, encouraging, supportive, present. There just was no comparison. And I thought, oh, poor you. You have a dad who cares. That was my response. To Adam's credit, that was not his response. Ian's anger and his confession to him had the effect of stopping Adam dead in his tracks, and he saw himself. And his words were not any of those things. They were, what have I done? What have I done? How can I repent? And I really do credit that response. It was obviously the word of the Holy Spirit in the moment to put that on his lips. But I think it set the stage for the reconciliation that ensued over the course of the next several years. But in the meanwhile, here's this very angry, rebellious boy, and we're like weeks from taking him and dropping him off thousands of miles away in Michigan on a campus with people whose opinion we really cared about. And we knew he was not in a good place. Like that gold star I was hoping for, probably wasn't going to get that. And what do? And we talked and we prayed, do we keep him home? Do we send him? What do we do? And we came to agreement that it was time to let him go, and that he really needed space and time to fail, if that's what he was going to do. And fail he did. We dropped him off at school, and we didn't hear from him. I mean, this kid that spent every single day in my presence, that was basically attached to my hip, went to school and pieced out for a semester. I got one phone call. And I thank the Lord for the fact that he put a watch on my lips, and he made me aware in my heart that I needed to leave that kid alone. Just leave him alone. Let him be. He would handle it from here. And we went out. Hill's still one of those rare schools that still respects parental authority. They know mom and dad are foot in the bill, and so they do parent-teacher conferences every semester. And we went out for parent-teachers conferences, and every teacher we met with basically said, Ian is such a great kid. He's such a smart kid. I'm really concerned about Ian. And we're like, oh, yeah, I'm really concerned about him too. But it didn't really, we didn't have any idea. Meanwhile, every single person that he introduced us to on campus, all the young people, his peers, this is my brother. Like, he had a very wide social group. And it became clear why.
Well, he was also the greatest ping pong player that the city of Hillsdale, Michigan had ever known. He never played ping pong a day in his life before he went to college. By Christmas time, he was the world champion and the world champion billiards player. And you think he might have had a couple of records down at the local bar, which shall remain nameless. He came home from Christmas and got his report card. And again, remember who we're talking about here. We live and die by the GPA. Report cards are our currency. That's like money. And he got a 2.2 grade point average at our alma mater from Dr. Bauman et al. From Hillsdale. He knew exactly how low that grade point was, given the Andrews family standards. And so we had a talk with him over Christmas. We said, son, I'm not going to send you back to this place and pay these bills if you're A, going to drag my scholastic reputation through the mud, and B, get a 2.2. So I think we'll have to keep you home. And he begged and said, please, all my brothers are there. I've got to go back to my people. And we had another talk, and we said, okay, but the scores have to come up. And he said, great, fine, whatever. And he followed up a 2.2 with a 1.6 in the spring semester. And we looked at each other and we said, well, the wheels are coming off now. I don't have any idea what's going on. And at this point, she gives me all kinds of credit for having the right response. But my right response to Ian in the moment was a little bit like Job in the first chapter. Job was blameless and upright. Job knew exactly what to say and when. Though he slay me, said Job with a little pietistic religion in his voice, yet will I trust in him. I knew that when someone confronts you, you say, how have I offended you and can I repent? But in my heart, she might not know, but in my heart, I was Job in chapter 30 saying, oh, I wish I knew where I could find him. I would come to his seat and fill my mouth with arguments. I would know the words that he would say to me. I would hear how he would answer me. Have I not obeyed all his ways? Have I not treasured his words more than my necessary food? Let me be weighed on honest scales, I said, taking the posture of Job, that the Lord may know my integrity. All of that was there. All of that was, I didn't get a 1.6. I got a 4.0. I didn't drink my way through my first semester. I kept my nose clean. This is on you, God. It's kind of like that.
And meanwhile, I was dying. I was really devastated. You can imagine, I'm sure. What with the misperceptions about identity laying at the foundation of the whole thing, I looked at the project that I was engaged in with my other kids. Remember, there are 5 more at home when this is going on, and thought, I really screwed this up. I probably should put them all in day school and quit. And about this time, Ian came home for the summer, and he saw me. I was very dejected, very confused, and disappointed in myself, really, because I really did have this feeling that was probably my fault somehow. But I didn't know how, and just like Adam, I was like, well, I dotted all the I's and I crossed all the T's, and I decided to go the opposite direction from the culture and to really, I thought, follow the Lord. And I gave my life to this, and every day laying down my life to give them their lessons and to just be available. I thought, where did I go wrong? And Ian takes one look at me and he goes, oh, Mom, please don't put my siblings in a day school. Please don't put that on my head too. How's that? Please don't put that on my head too. Don't make me responsible for that as well. And it makes me cry. But Adam and I, we were driving. We have some of our best conversations in the car. We were driving alone, which was rare, having conversation about this. And I'm a very verbal processor. Are there any verbal processors in the room? Isn't it amazing how verbal processors, when we're talking, we learn things?
So do we all.
We're saying things out loud, and we have no idea what's going to come out of our mouth. And then something comes out of our mouth, and it sounds like we're like teaching people, but really it's like, I didn't know that. Really? Wow! That's what happened. We're driving along verbal processing about the situation with our kids, and out of my mouth comes, I think this is all our fault. I think this is idolatry. I think we have perverted the process of homeschooling with idolatry. I think that you and I have served the grades, have served the project as if it were God. We've looked to it to give us identity when really identity comes from God. And the result is you and I have become like high priest and priestess of the education process. And the whole thing has fallen apart, as well it should have. And let's not even go into how it corrupted the homeschool co-op atmosphere, right? Can you guess? Right? Can you guess? Nothing good in that equation. But once we saw this, once we began to see ourselves, the Lord gave us not only eyes to see our sin, but simultaneously, as only God can do, he produced grace. He sent grace to cover our sin as we repented, and to each other, first to each other, then to the kids themselves, then to the ladies in the co-op. And it was the best kind of humiliation. C.S. Lewis wrote a wonderful book called The Great Divorce, and there's a character in that book that talks about shame. And he says, if you would drink the cup of shame to the bottom, you would find it very nourishing. And I can attest to that. The cup of shame that God hands to you to drink is very nourishing. And also not your death. At least not in any permanent way because of the life of Jesus Christ. That part of me that pursued identity through performance, through A's, that needed to die. And as soon as it died, there was a liberation in our homeschool experience. It was infused with grace. There's no other way to say it. The homeschool experience was infused with grace. And though it looked very similar just in terms of, education is education. You read, you write, you do arithmetic, right? Hopefully you do arithmetic unless your kid skips it for a year. But yes, that's the idea. It looks a lot the same, but the animating spirit behind it was entirely different. And the results, they couldn't have been more different, both in my heart and in my relationship with my children, and in their understanding about education and who they were and what made them so. The spirit in our home changed. That being said, the Lord simultaneously was working on Ian. And lest you guys think we're talking out of school and exposing our son, I just want you to know that usually, I'm not the one on the stage here with Adam telling the story. Usually he is. They do a father-son talk that if you ever have a chance to get in on, it's really a blessing. Because what they do is they take turns saying, it was all my fault. Adam says, this is all my fault. And Ian goes, no, Dad, this was all my fault. It's amazing to watch because that's what the Lord accomplished when this was going down. He took Ian far away, and Ian was having his own crisis experience where he came up against himself and was pushing on these identity issues, failing, big fail, right? And then realizing after that second low GPA that maybe he wanted to do well. Maybe it wasn't about us and whether we were expecting him to do well. Maybe this was actually he was capable of doing well. Maybe God was actually calling him to do well because he'd given him the means to do well. And maybe he was even calling him into a career that would require this kind of preparation. And then he began to dig. And do you know how hard it is to dig yourself out of a hole that deep in a GPA? That kid worked his tail off for 3 more years and ended up graduating with a 3.0. And I'm really, really proud of him because that was an awfully difficult thing to accomplish. But also, by the time he got a decent GPA, it really didn't matter anymore. The grades have ceased to matter. What the Lord does in the process is the thing that really matters. And what he did with Ian is capture his heart. He showed Ian his sin because his mom and dad weren't around when he failed. He couldn't put it on us. He had no one to blame but himself for those GPAs. And he did. He blamed himself very, very deeply. And even after he graduated with the 3.0, he kind of saw himself, his identity, his self-concept was really affected by the experience. It was a very humbling experience for him. So he gained that humility, but also there was a dark cloud around it. He walked around pretty much feeling like he was an idiot. that he had ruined everything, that it was all his fault. And it wasn't until he got married and he and his wife began working for us at CenterForLit that the two of them said, you know, Mom, I think we really need you to write a book about homeschooling. I said, why? I mean, I did all, you know, like I did it all wrong. What are you talking about? Nobody wants a book from me about homeschooling. They're like, no, we do. We need you to write a book about homeschooling. I said, I'll pray about it. And as I prayed about it, what I realized is that I needed to tell my story of my failure. See, you guys don't need me. I am not what you need. What you need is the God who saved me in the midst of this failure. He's what you really need. And the best thing that I can do for you in order to connect you with him is tell you the truth about myself and tell you what he did for me. That is, walk in the light with you, which is what I'm really trying to do here right now. So anyway, I began to write, and it was not the book that Ian and Emily thought that I was going to write. I really do think they were expecting me to write a how-to book with lots of homeschool hacks and more in the mommy blogger vein, and that's just not what came out. What came out is a memoir that I entitled My Divine Comedy, because it really does parallel the story that the medieval author Dante, the Italian author, wrote in his Divine Comedy. Midway through this journey of our life, I found myself in a dark wood because the right path had been wholly lost. Me, how difficult it is to talk about it now, right? This is the way that the Divine Comedy begins. And it's basically Dante's midlife crisis, which, you know, it kind of boils down to that trope. This was a bit of a midlife crisis for us. It was God's let me get your attention moment in our life. So I began to write this story, and as I said, I'm a verbal processor. And so as I wrote my story, I saw more clearly than ever, what had happened. You know, I'm telling the story. This is how it went down. This is who I was. This is where I came from. Here's what I did. Here's how we did it. And then here's the state that I found myself in. And here's the condition my son found himself in. And here's where it all went awry. And as I wrote, I saw more and more exactly what had gone down there. And I saw the God who met me where I was, who met Ian where he was, and who sovereignly ordained even my sin in order to draw me to a knowledge of his love for me, to a knowledge of his unflappable, dependable love and his commitment to me and to my children. And as it got time to publish this, I became more and more reluctant to do so. Because, well, first of all, you would see me. Isn't everybody scared of that? Don't raise your hand. I mean, they'll see me, right? They'll see through me. That was really, really scary. But more than that, when you're a mom and you're a homeschool mom, your story's not your own. It's all welded together with your children's stories and your husband's story, and it's complicated. And I couldn't tell my story without telling Ian's story, and Megan's story, and Aaron's story, and Molly, and Calvin, and Charlie's story. It was all wrapped up together, one big ball of wax. And it forced me to go to my son and say, now you asked me to write this book, but I don't think you really knew what I was going to do. And so your relationship with me is so important to me that I will deep six this book. I will set it on fire before I publish it without your permission. Like, will you read it? Please read it. Tell me how you feel about this, and let's communicate. Well, I was just, wanting his permission to do what I thought was exposing him, but there was something much more significant going on there. And it's this, that our kids are always with us after they're born, I mean, first we carry them 9 months in the womb, and then we're homeschooling them, so they're constantly with us. And we just sort of assume that our experience was their experience, right? That they know what happened with us. They know. He knew what happened with me. But no, he didn't know. He was experiencing it from his own point of view, which was limited. limited narrator, right? And same for me. He needed me to narrate back what had happened for him. And the result of the project was real, honest-to-goodness healing and restoration in our relationship with one another. He gave me more than permission. He begged me to publish it and said, please, Mom, don't worry about what people think about you. Those moms out there, I guarantee you that there are a lot of them that are much like you. And I doubt very much that you're going to get the censure, right? The tomatoes in the face that you're expecting. Instead, I think that what's going to happen is you're going to connect with a lot of people. And that is exactly what has happened as I, with fear and trepidation, published this story of what happened. I've gotten so many emails from moms basically saying, me too, because it is a common story in homeschooling. The conflation of identity and activity, even if you don't do it in your homeschool. Maybe you're like, well, why would I ever homeschool after hearing this? I'm just going to put my kids in day school and be done with it, right? Well, it will find you there too. It'll find you in the PTA meetings. And if you aren't a homeschool mom, maybe you're a dad. It's going to find you in your job, in your volunteer work when you're coaching Little League. The ladders are everywhere. And I think it's honestly because the Lord wants to reach down, and he uses these experiences in our life, these Job-type experiences, to scoop us up into his arms and say, you know what? This is where you've always belonged. You've always been my child. And I name my children. They don't name themselves. And this was never a self-construction project. Raising up your kids is not a child construction process, right? I knew them before the foundations of the world, just like I knew you. They had a name. I knew their name, right? And it was written on my heart. It was written in my hands. It's written very close to me. And they're secure, just like you're secure. I'm talking too much.
No, you're not. That's great. Thank you. We don't have a lot of time left, but I just want to kind of put a capper on it by referring again to the story of Job. Those of you who were in my talk before will remember this. Elihu says at one important point, God does this, referring to Job's suffering, twice, 3 times with a man. I love the rhythm there. He does it twice. He does it 3 times. The sense is almost, he'll do it as many times as is necessary to save his soul from the pit so that he is lighted with the light of life. What Job learned in all his sufferings is that these are the acts of a God of mercy, of a God of love, of a God that loves us and wants loving relationships for us. He wants salvation for us, and he wants fulfillment and joy for us, and is willing to do what's necessary in order to bring us there. And in Job's case, who was a hard case, what was necessary is a little adverse work, as Martin Luther would have put it. And what Job learns is that adverse work was in the plan of God for mercy and grace for him. And I think that Job rejoiced in the end to look back on his suffering. And in my own case, I rejoice to look back on this time of suffering because of what God did, not only for me and my soul, not only delivering me from the idolatry of Moloch, for goodness sakes. I sacrificed my son on the idol. Not only what he did for my own soul, but what he did for my relationship with Ian. He is one of my best friends, maybe my best friend in the world. We are partners in business, and we are compadres in all other things, and we have as open and as honest and as pure a relationship as 2 men can possibly have. And I'll tell you this, had this all not gone down, we would not have that kind of relationship. He would be at the very most my dutiful son who does exactly what he's supposed to do. And I would probably be proud of him for shallow, selfish reasons. And what I have instead is a brother in Christ. And we've been around a block together that involves sin and repentance and forgiveness and reconciliation. And I think this is the way of the gospel. And so I rejoice to think of it. Maybe the same way that Job rejoiced, even before he got his clothes and his flocks and herds and his children back in the end. I think he was already restored even before those things happened because he'd been around the block with God. It has been a pleasure speaking with you this weekend. Thank you so much for having us. I don't know if we have time to take a question or two. Would that be appropriate, a response from the audience? I don't know if that's in the cards or not, but we like to do that. Give us 1 minute, just in case. Does anybody have a question or a comment for Missy or me? Yes, ma'am.
You said that things changed after all of this. Have you seen the fruit of that in just the time you had left?
Well, yes, in a variety of different ways. The changes that took place first were in my heart and in his. They changed the tone I told you in our homeschool that with the other 5 children. It was quite a different experience for them, though we read a lot of the same books and the curriculum didn't change, their mother changed. I can't say that we are who we are, and we have feet of clay. And so, the Lord has a way of continuing to tether us to himself and make us dependent on him on a daily basis. But I knew grace in a way that I didn't before, and wanted the kids to have a graceful experience. These things that I pursued for identity became activities that were delightful with the kids after the fact. In terms of fruitfulness in the kids' lives, all 6 of my kids have grown up to know and follow Jesus. They all love the Lord. They are productive members of society and integral members of our family community. We couldn't be more proud of them or more blessed by God. We are undeserving servants. We've only done what the Lord told us we should do. And he has poured out life on our family as a result. Just one more thing. A lot of people say or said to me when I started the homeschooling project, hey, homeschooling is great because you, Mom, you get a second chance at your education. It's true, but not the way I thought. I thought that meant I was going to get to learn my facts better, my math facts, and I was going to get a chance to brush up on those states and capitals, and, But that's not what education is. Education is being brought up short, right? Taught that there's a God and you're not him, right? I did get a second chance at my education, and God was so merciful to me. One of the things that Job, and you guys have read the book of Job. The book of Job ends with God admonishing Job to pray for his comforters. And so I would just really like for us to pray for you, if that would be all right, if that'd be amenable to you in this closing moment. Lord, I just want to lift up these mothers and fathers that are pursuing home education for their children, that are laying their lives down on a daily basis and earnestly desiring, zealously desiring to do a good job. I pray, Heavenly Father, that you would guard them against pride, that you would guard them against pursuing this good thing as the ultimate thing. I pray, Lord, that you would do a work in their hearts, a work of grace in their hearts, that would demonstrate to them your love for them and your faithfulness to bring them and their children up in nurture and admonition and joy. I pray, Lord, that you bless their projects in Jesus' name.